Hello, my friend, and welcome to this episode of A Call to Leadership. I'm Dr. Nate Salah, your host. So glad you are here. Well, on this episode of the show, we're going to unpack some financial tools for your tool belt in terms of what does a generous life look like? What does living generously look like? We believe in generosity, but sometimes we don't really understand how it is unrolled in our lives. I've invited an expert in this area, my dear friend and colleague in the financial services sector, Mr. Adam Hautly with Thrivent, who is going to have a wonderful dialogue with me about different kinds of ways that we can be generous, not just with our money, but with our time and with our talents, and even a few strategies on maximizing our ability to give generously. Can't wait for you to listen in. This is A Call to Leadership. Adam Hautly, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very, very much. I'm so honored and blessed to be here. And for those of you who are listening, we're recording about 2 weeks before tax day, and here Nate is hosting podcasts instead of working on tax returns. And I mean that in such a complimentary way. The way that you've set up your practice and your team as well. Here you get to on a Monday.
15 days, but who's counting?
Poof. You get one of those candy cane countdowns like right. Advent. To be able to do this on a Monday in the thick of tax season is such a testament to the way that you've set up your practice.
Thank you, my friend. Well, the time will tell from here to the 15th if it was a wise choice. The truth be told, kudos to the team. And, our accounting and advisory, this is year number 30. And it's because of the team that I'm able to do this and share these wonderful, inspiring conversations with our listener to add value to their lives. And you've added value to my life over the last few years. In fact, I remember meeting you and many listeners all over the world. However, this part of the world, there's a cheese company, Hautly Cheese. I can see the little the red cheese enclosure. Is it always red? Or is it different
You're
colors?
Talking about our Gouda.
Gouda, yeah, your Gouda cheese. Oh, that's so good. And I always think you come from that environment, and you're going to share a little bit about moving that from there to financial services. I always think the cheese business, there should be like a complementary, a business that has some kind of laxatives, right? Just in case you get stopped. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I don't know. But hey, if you're not human, it happens, right? Little too much cheese.
I am very blessed to be married to a plumber's daughter. So it worked out. It worked out really well. Yeah, no, I did. I was with our family company. My great grandfather started it back in 1934. We did cheese, dairy, anything that could be on a refrigerated truck for a period of time. We were able to distribute to the local grocery stores here, and it was awesome. I was our CFO starting in about 2008. It's interesting in the grocery world. During a financial situation like 2008, business went very well when people, struggled through, losing jobs or, financial concerns. They stopped going out to eat and they went to where our customers were, which was the grocery chains here in St. Louis. Mm. And so I came in as our CFO, was there for about 5 years before transitioning through some amazing conversations with my dad, who was third generation. I was fourth generation, and transitioned to personal finance after that, and all with Thrivent that entire time.
So, and here you are.
Yeah, 10 years after.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
and no holes in your financial cheese, right?
Just the Swiss. Yeah, no holes in the financials.
We're both dads. I know, right? I guess dad jokes are just another way to say jokes that aren't funny.
Right.
Maybe.
Yep. Yeah, I made a few of those earlier today, and when I was at a store, and the person helping me was not very amused, and
didn't laugh.
I had to explain. Sorry, that's the dad joke. Yeah.
That's all right. We can laugh. You get to an age too where you really don't care. That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
But, it's fine. Don't laugh. I'm like, I'll forget this conversation probably in a week. Well, one of the things that we love to discuss through our community and our calling for stewardship is generosity.
Yeah.
And we have our G3 program under our Great Summit umbrella of leadership excellence and leadership development. And the first G stands for grow purposefully. We want people to grow not purposely, but purposefully. In other words, full of purpose. And that's what Jesus said. He said, I have come to get your life and have it to the full, right? Purposefully. Our second G is give generously, because we believe that if you can grow, then your time, talent, and treasures that you're multiplying can then be turned around to bless. In fact, and our third G is to go, and to go love radically, because that was Jesus's model. He was, his love was the antithesis of what we expected it to be. It raised the bar to the highest possible level. And interestingly, about this second tier of the giving piece, my son asked me this years ago. I don't know how old he was, maybe about 8 or 9. He said, Dad, is it wrong to want to be rich? I mean, really rich. I remember we were sitting across the kitchen table, and I started laughing. I was like, you had to qualify, not just rich. He said, really rich. I mean, really. And that's exactly how he said, I mean, really rich. And you just see his eyes turn into dollar signs, right? And I said, you know what, son? It's a great question. This is, of course, now he's 18 now, and in just a few weeks. So you're talking about a decade ago. I was in business for about 20 years. I had seen a lot of people from the financial side. And I'd seen the completely destitute, all the way to never have to work another day in your life, and everyone in between. And I said, son, all the ones after the zero in someone's bank account don't really impress me. What's truly remarkable is what we do with our financial increases to bless others, to make the world better. And that's really what I believe the purpose of wealth is. It's not so that we can hoard it and so that we are consumed by the love of money, because as the scripture says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. Money isn't the root of all kinds of evils. It's the love of it. And truth be told, the love of chocolate could be the root of all kinds of evils, right? The love of fancy cars. Oh, did I just say that? Or anything that really becomes an idol, right? That puts our lives in front of God. So I believe one of the antidotes to that is to be generous with that. By the way, in my opinion, and not only mine, I believe it's scriptural, we are simply stewards. We're caretakers. Because, as you know, and we've said this before, it's rare, although it might have happened, it's rare that you see a giant Brinks truck following the hearse to the cemetery. Just bury it with me. Maybe in the Pharaoh days that used to happen. So I believe we have an obligation, a responsibility to be good stewards of what we're entrusted with, not just our physical money, of course, our time and our talents. However, today, talking about all the ways that we have to be generous. If we're in that place where we can be generous, and of course, you've got a lot of experience in this space, really unpacking some of the different ways that people haven't heard about, or maybe they have and they don't really understand it, so that we give people an understanding and perhaps a little bit of a blessing in that, because as the scripture says, blessed is the generous giver. So your turn. I'm just going to sit here and listen for the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you shared that we are stewards with what we were blessed with. It's not our money. It's what we were given by God, and then what we do with it is ultimately the ability to bless others. It's funny because your son says, to be really rich, and both you and I have seen very, very well off or wealthy people be very miserable. And sometimes it stems from a concern of loss of what they've amassed. And yet you see people who may not have the healthiest of finances, and they could be happy as all get out, because ultimately, like you shared, having something worshipped in this world is not necessarily going to make you fulfilled. And I love that fulfilled part. It is what you're giving to others. The other thing too, when you mention time, talents, treasures, I love those three ways to share. And I think of it in terms of, I have young kids, and when you talk to people who may not feel as financially secure as others, because they're going through the thick of it with kids, those kind of things, making sure the house payment is done, the bills are paid, the kids get to, experience things that is not free. And so there's oftentimes this, maybe a disclaimer that I put when I talk to young families, and I say, do you have a charitable urge? Because I don't want them to have to answer, do you give away any money?
That's good. That's good.
So that ability to say, hey, if I'm not at a place where I feel comfortable giving money for whatever financial purpose, that doesn't mean that you can't give and be generous. I love the second pillar, the give generously. We have a program within Thrivent where we get to do what's called an action team. And it doesn't matter your financial relationship with Thrivent. If you have a Thrivent policy or product, then you get to take $500 from Thrivent across 2 events. They're called action teams. And we send you volunteer t-shirts, and across the front of the volunteer t-shirts, it says live generously.
I love it.
So if you ever see, ever walking around and see, every year it changes colors too. So it's kind of like a collect 'em all and everything. But if you see a live generously t-shirt, that came from a Thrivent action team where we're giving our clients $250 twice a year to go support charitable, actionable stuff, no matter what it is. Could be raising money for church. It could be helping out a neighbor who maybe needs a little bit of lawn care, and you can put together a team that can buy all the bags and, the clippers and all that kind of stuff. And then, get pizza for the crew that goes, and puts that together. And everybody walks away with the Live Generously t-shirt, and it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I really appreciate the way you described the urge, right? Because, some people feel as though perhaps they should be giving more, and maybe they don't have the means to, and we're talking about financially at this point, right? However, there are other ways to be generous, and I won't get into why the ways that we can multiply and increase even the small amounts. Well, I guess we could talk about it. Even with, like you said, a family, you might have a family. I remember when we were just trying to get by. And there was, there was a need to provide for others, and I didn't really have a lot of disposable income. I considered it a sacrifice, and yet took a leap of faith, right? And said, "Okay, God, here it is. I'm not asking for 10 times in return." However, there's times where we can just, there's a trust God factor in that as well, and it just depends on a lot of different pieces to this equation of life and what we're experiencing. I have found, especially with in a family context, to do our best to not just have a certain number. People say, oh, well, I got to give 10%. And it's interesting because Jesus didn't put a number on it when he showed generosity. Of course, the old woman with 2 mites, I can't remember what the dollar amount was, but basically it was, and the Pharisees who had the coins, that they had more money, but they wanted to sound good when it hit the hit the donation box, and what he said, that she was the one who was a true giver, even though it was a much smaller amount. So it's not necessarily about the amount; it's about the condition of your heart. I think that's a really important piece, right, to this idea of generosity, right? What's the condition? Am I in a place to where, man, you know what? I have compassion for others who may be in a place that is less fortunate than me, and I want to be a part of their blessing in their life. It's a different mindset than saying, oh well, if I don't have 10%, I guess I'm not gonna give anything. All right, it's not about that. I don't think it's about that. And so, I think when we step in the gap, especially in the financial services sector, let's not like focus on like, oh, I didn't give $10,000 this year, I'm a loser, right? It's not that. Give $1.
Where your heart stems from is such an important part of giving. As so Thrivent is a faith-based financial services company, and one of the things that often leads to is conversations when you're talking with somebody, a family that wants to talk about being generous with their with their giving, and they go, okay, well, I know I'm supposed to tithe. It's like, okay, well, hold on, where does that really resonate with you? And then it's like, oh, no, I'm supposed to tithe. Now, can I ask a question? Am I tithing my gross or my net? Am I tithing, what I take home after medical deductions, insurance deductions and 401k? Am I
after taxes?
Yeah. And it's not, that takes, I think, some of the powerfulness out of it when you're trying to hit a number instead of a purpose. Mm-hmm. So one thing that people are very familiar with is, a charitable giving strategy, right? So you're actually creating a strategy. And I think that's helpful and important, but one thing I want people to realize is there's a charitable living strategy, and that probably encompasses the giving that most people think about in terms of, financially. But I think that charitable living strategy allows for more of an integration in your life, not a checkbox after you get your taxes done to say, okay, that's how much we have to give this year. And also the ability to give while you're living versus when somebody comes in and says, hey, here's what I want from my legacy. I want my legacy to include something charitable as well as maybe taking care of the next generation, for instance. Mm. And understanding that you can give throughout your life, and that doesn't just have to be money, but if it is, it doesn't always have to be those check boxes. Mm-hmm. I believe, and I don't know the exact statistics, so I may be wrong here, but I believe finance is the top or one of the most talked about topics in the Bible. And so, if you're concerned that, making money and being successful financially, for instance, may be against the will of God, then maybe just changing that relationship with, money can be really helpful. Yeah. In my devotion 2 mornings ago, it was the story of the master who went away for a period of time and entrusted 3 of his servants with 5 lots of money. I don't remember what they're called. 5 lots of money, 2 lots, and 1 lot.
Yeah. Denarii.
Yeah, denarii. Yeah, and came back, and the servant with 5 had doubled that. The servant with 2 had doubled that, and the servant with 1 said, "I know that you're conservative in nature, so I dug a hole in the ground and I buried it to preserve it for you. Here's your 1 back." And that was looked very unfavorably by the master. And so to say that is a lesson in the Bible, but yet we can't talk about, like your son saying, I want to make a lot of money. Well, those kind of things are even biblically sound. And then it gives you, I think, that permission to be charitable, whatever that may mean to you.
That's one of my favorite parables on multiplying and increasing what we're entrusted with. And it's interesting, that parable, because the servant, they're all three servants, and the third servant who buried the money, of course, as you said, was concerned, right? You are another version says you are a hard, a hard master.
Yeah, we had you take the risk tolerance questionnaire when you were filling out your dinar risk tolerance.
Zero risk tolerance. And the part of the challenge in that is that they were instructed to invest it. They were instructed to multiply. It wasn't even their money. It was the master's money, right? And the servants were each instructed to go out and multiply it. And the reward for the one who made 10 and the other one who made 4 was the same. So it's not even the multiplication factor that matters, right? You're not going to necessarily receive a different reward for how much performance you have in your portfolio for God. It's whether or not you actually do the work and live generously, like you said. And one of the things I love about that is because it's the heart of our community, because there's 2 responses that you get for either multiplying and increasing what you're entrusted with, or burying your time, talent, and treasures because you're afraid that your God will be harsh with you if you don't have X, Y, or Z performance. One response is, you wicked and lazy servant, and you get cast out. The other is, well done, good and faithful servant, come and dine with your master. And so these are choices. And truly, it is a little, let's just call it what it is. It's a little lazy to say, I'm not going to do anything with it, right? It's okay. You know what? It's okay if it ends up, maybe the multiplication factor doesn't, who knows what it's going to be. That's not your job, right? Your job isn't to make it, make it to be a certain amount. Your job is to be obedient. That's your job. That's my job. But we operate often in fear. So this is a really good conversation around the fear of not living generously is living in scarcity rather than abundance, right? Let's just call it what it is. I'm afraid that there's not going to be enough, in this case, of the master's love or grace. And God's saying in this story, look, you'll have that. Just give. I'll take care of the rest. It's easy.
When you consider it in terms of what I have to give, and I'm sure as well as you, I don't mean to talk negatively about people who love to tithe as their generosity goal. That is a fantastic place if you're doing that from your heart, and attempting to get to a number that we're told is also the same amount that we should be saving for our futures as well. When it's an expense on your budget and not a gift from your heart, then I think that it's the opposite of what God wants us to do with sharing. If you go, hey, I gifted my $10 this week out of my $100 of income, and man, that's going to really pinch me for the mortgage, then maybe we're thinking about it in the wrong way. It's great to feel right up against that sacrifice, but when it becomes about referencing back to your son, when it comes about how many zeros are at the end, then it's less about the feeling of blessing others.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And to me, the focus, when the focus is, oh, I'm doing my duty, or I feel good about myself because I was really generous. This goes back to and by the way, that wasn't a parable. This goes back to Jesus watching the lady go to give her money versus the actual Pharisees doing it, because they wanted to feel pretty proud of their investment. You say, well, hey, isn't it really my work? I mean, I'm the one who took the risk. I'm the one who saved the money. I'm the one who did X, Y, and Z, right? I would say, have a conversation with God. You should take that up with God. I'm not your God. You're not their God, right? Go to Scripture. See what Scripture says about wealth and how we treat what we're entrusted with. I think it says it's all a gift from God. So, the Bible says that the God caused the rain to fall on the good and the unrighteous, right? He's blessing all of us. And so I don't want to take ownership of that. Even though, I worked hard. You've worked hard, Adam. We worked, really hard. And okay, great. There's a harvest for that. I don't want to take credit for the harvest. All I want to do is take credit for allowing God to use me. Like, God, the credit I get is really just coming back to you, in other words, saying, hey, thank you. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing me to have this abundance to turn around and then give it back to you through these different ways, these different ministries, or these different opportunities, or these different needs. What an honor.
I think if anybody's ever struggling with knowing whether or not they're giving, from the heart, I think, for instance, a lot of donations nowadays or charitable giving is, done electronically. Mm-hmm. And as something as absolutely simple as there's a little box before you hit any donation, and it says, do you wish to make this gift anonymous? Or if you uncheck that box, then your name's going to be displayed, sometimes with your amount and things like that. And I challenge anybody who just wants to know if they're doing that from the heart and for the right reason. If you question whether or not you are, it can feel great to bless others, but hit that anonymous box and just know that you will never, ever get thanked for that on this planet. Mm. But knowing that you and your family got to do that and nobody else had to know is pretty powerful.
Indeed, yeah. It reminds me what years ago at a church I went to, I had a pastor worship pastor, who would talk about when you received your accolades, right, from people. He'd say, "Oh, I already got my rewards. I got my rewards now. I don't get my rewards in heaven." And this is what Jesus is talking about. And when we are seeking the approval and the accolades of man, then we've already got a reward. Okay, that's who you wanted to impress. Congratulations. Mm-hmm. And hey, look, I'm guilty as charged. Like, this is not like super pious Adam and Nate show. This is like, we've been there. Maybe you haven't. You're a pretty pious guy. I think I even saw you walking like 2 feet above the above the ground when you walked in.
I bring a vat of water, right. Just so I often joke that my wife and I, our family, we are my worst client, and that includes stepping back and taking time for us to get on that same page, and I think getting on the same page and then also executing those actions. So if it is, hey, I do want to give away this much this year because that's something that, we decided together, like the cobbler's shoes, oftentimes I forget to go back and focus on the two of us. And I think sometimes the best time to create those strategies is not when you're pushing up against a December 31st charitable giving tax strategy, but instead saying, hey, maybe it's, I don't know, mid-July, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on our family vacation just talking about who and who do we want to bless and what do we want to bless them with this year.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you are doing that outwardly with your family, not in a braggadocious way, but talking about charitable living strategies with especially young kids, then that's instilled in them at such a young age. And a lot of the tools that you get to use nowadays from a charitable giving strategy can be multi-generational. So how amazing is it that if you do have large wishes of giving away financial means, that can be something that your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids can participate and feel that same amazingness. You get to even set some of those things up ahead of time where you say, hey, I want this to always be anonymous, or, I want this to always, adhere to these values. I think that's such a cool and powerful thing. And if you can start that at a young age, my kids, as we're recording this, my kids are 6 and 8. If my wife and I can spend time teaching them to be charitable now, when they have the couple dollars that, grandma and grandpa gave them for cleaning their house or something, the little chores that they get to do and stuff. I think that's such a cool lesson they get to learn way early, and it instills in them for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely, 100%. And we'll get into shortly the different ways that we can give because or live generously, which include other ways besides money, of course, property and securities, et cetera, a lot of different ways that can be tied into that, and involving the family. So helpful. I remember I had this 30 days of love that my son and I did a few years ago, and we just did 30 days before Christmas, and every day we just wanted to be generous. We want to live generously in different ways. None of it was actual cash. Some of it was, hey, your grandmother needs her lawn mower. Let's go do that today. Let's go take some food downtown and feed the homeless. Let's go take donuts to the police station up the street. Let's give send some pizzas anonymously to somewhere else, to the firehouse, right? All these different things that were just creative ways to begin to think about living generously, and then carry it on throughout the year. Can make it a habit. And maybe it's not every single day, but it becomes more of like, let me think about that. What's a way I can be generous? Because my goodness, living generously, think about a world that lives generously. And those are some of the ways on an individual level. Now, do we get a charitable contribution deduction? No. And that's another thing. It's like sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Of course, people say, well, I want to, contribute to a qualified charitable organization, a 501c3. And others say, maybe I'll do a little of that. Maybe I don't care. Maybe there's just a family in need, and I'm just going to give them whatever, some holiday dinner or something like that, right? Some clothes, a gift card, et cetera, et cetera. So those are totally up to you, whether or not you take advantage of the tax code. Some people say, well, I don't want to do that. I feel like I'm giving less if I take advantage of the tax code. So I want to smack them and say, no, it's called wise strategic planning, because now what you'll be able to do is have more. Because if you're in a 30% tax bracket, let's just throw a number out there, and you give $100 and there's a $30 back to you, then if you want, give that $30 back. There's $130. And of course, then, just a remainder of money, et cetera, et cetera. But the concept is, okay, well, what are some strategic ways that I can live generously? And I'd love to share some of those ways that you have in your wheelhouse for people to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I had a client as we were talking through one of these strategies not too long ago, and they said, well, I don't want to do that strategy. And I was explaining, as we were explaining, a donor advised fund, just as a great example. And I said, that's totally fine. Whatever you feel is your method of generosity, but can I ask you why? And she turned to me and she said, well, give to God what is God, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And I know this person well enough that I was able to return to her, well, Caesar wrote the laws that let you give like this, so maybe we can take advantage of this, and it'll make your giving that much more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's one, you mentioned the donor advised funds, we call them DAFs. And so what a great way to make charitable contributions without feeling the rush of figuring out who or what charity I want to contribute to before 12/31. That's always a big deadline for people, and you get the list of charities. You got them all out on the table, and like, oh, how much are we gonna give here? How much? Hey, we're almost out of time. And the spouse is like, hey, did we give or what? We got to make sure we catch that deadline. Blah, blah, blah.
Well, and the funny part is that I was the development director for a charity here in St. Louis, and my timing couldn't have been worse. It was right after the standard deduction doubled, and people had to go back to the only giving with their heart thing for a lot of times. But as we worked through budgeting and things like that, the charities, your church, your school, they are so grateful for those large donations. And if you can set a way that you split that large donation periodically throughout the year, and they know about it coming in, it allows for them to operate on a budget versus a hope that on December 31st, they're going to get this influx of cash. And so, understanding, yes, I know that some strategies for nonprofits are you have the monthly automatic deduction from your, checking account or perhaps a credit card. And that's great. Half the time you forget about that after a year, and it still comes in and it helps to support some amazing causes. But even if you go back with some of these strategies and say, hey, I am going to be strategic with the lump sum, but then allow the charity to have it over the course of, a longer period of time, or maybe a frequent period of time, it allows for them to operate in ways that, in the same way that your income is coming in, as long as you're working, for instance, it's the same way with what they get to do then with those blessings that you're giving them. Yeah,
what a great concept, and thanks for sharing that. These charities do rely. If you're going to give anyway, why wait till 12/31?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hello.
Well, and a charity is just like you and I. If you get a large lump sum, there is a much easier ability to spend that quickly. Whereas if you get to spread that out, then you get to be strategic with it, and I think that allows for their operating budgets to be absolutely polished compared to the individual lump sums and stuff like that. I know that kind of goes in the face of what I said a minute ago, where you hit the anonymous donation and stuff. If you can let a charity know that, hey, this is going to come in on a regular basis, or these dollars are coming in, it allows for them to plan.
So this is great. So there's a lot of different ways that people can live generously besides cash. Let's talk about some of those ways.
Yeah. I'm going to start from the most simple, and then we'll kind of go up to maybe some of the more complex stuff that we get to see at Thrivent. There's an organization here in St. Louis. It's called Home Sweet Home. Amazing organization. They help people who are transitioning from either sheltered living or homelessness into permanent housing. And part of their program is, or the majority of their program is, accepting furniture and household donations. And then their clients, which are the people that they're serving, their clients get to come in and shop. And so what you're doing is, it's not always that you're donating money. You could be donating that piece of furniture that's kind of sat in the back in the storage area in the basement, and you're going to get rid of it, but you're going to put it on, I don't know, Facebook Marketplace for $10 or whatever it is. Organizations like that can help you declutter and give you the ability to bless somebody else with something that, no, you may not get to write that off on your itemized deductions on Schedule A, but that is something that you can donate and really make an impact. So there's incredible organizations that are doing a lot of things like that, where you're donating maybe things that you would otherwise not use, that may be just sitting around. Then you start to get into donating what people normally think about, which would be donating cash, writing the check either at the end of the year or, giving your offering to church and things like that. That's great. And the IRS has some really beneficial, as you have helped countless people over the past 30 years. There are some great rules within the IRS limits that allow you to be charitable from a tax efficient way. Some of the ones that I think people don't always know about just yet, or maybe have heard of and just aren't familiar with the concept, are what we just talked about, for instance, which is a donor advised fund.
You know what? Before you get to that,
yeah,
at the state level too, guys. If you're listening and you're wanting to donate cash dollars at the state level, whatever state you're in, like for example here in Missouri, there are a number of charitable organizations that you would be able to get 50% cash back, 70%, some up to 100%. Yes, you heard me right. That means that, and of course, this would be in tax credits against your tax liability. Of course, consult your accountant. However, that almost sounds insane, right? So I'm going to donate $100, and on my tax return for my state, you're going to take $100 off of my tax bill. That is correct. And of course, you can research the different credits in your home state. It's pretty exciting to think about that, right? You're like, well, wait a minute. Am I really giving? This goes back to the original concept. Now you'll have another $100 so that you can give to someone else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I think it brings up a great point too of, if today what we'll talk about is the 30,000 foot, couple details of some of those 30,000 foot strategies. When you are working with an advisor, a tax advisor especially, who knows what they're doing, and I don't mean this just as a commercial for Nate, but if you work with a tax advisor that knows some of those strategies and is familiar with them and has resources, and if they don't know, they're willing to learn, then it saves you from having to go back and try to research it all yourself, because you're probably going to get some conflicting information and such. And so a great tax advisor is absolutely crucial in understanding some of these, I don't mean to say complex generosity strategies, because they're ultimately not really complex. They just have a couple extra steps than what you're used to as far as writing a check and putting it in the mail to your favorite charity or your church.
Makes sense. Yeah, good plug. And there are wonderful firms all around the nation and abroad. Just have the conversation.
Yeah. It starts with a question. Don't start that question on April 14th.
Please.
Maybe April 16th or after.
17th. Yeah. The 17th. Give a day of rest. Even the Bible says one day.
But that could be part of that, as I, briefly mentioned a minute ago. Maybe that's part of your July family vacation conversation. Well, cool. While you're, finishing up, while you're flying home or driving home, maybe shoot an email or a message to your accountant and say, hey, I'd love to explore some tax strategies. And if you have a dollar amount in mind and your professional knows about your financial situation, they can often even be more strategic on top of that. They're probably very happy to give you some general information. But if you say, hey, we talked about this, we want to donate X number of dollars, to me, that allows for some planning above and beyond just I'd like to be charitable. What are my options?
Yeah. And since we're on the subject of this donor advised fund, talk a little bit about what can be put into that. Can securities, appreciated securities be put into it? Can real estate, what can be put into it?
Yeah, it's funny. Thrivent serves over 1 million clients, and we have an entire extension called Thrivent Charitable. And Thrivent Charitable is unbelievable. We get to work with them on a daily basis for all of this charitable strategy stuff. And so I asked some of my colleagues over at Thrivent Charitable, I said, what's the oddest thing that you've ever seen donated? And I'll explain what I mean here in a minute with the donation. And they've had livestock, We have, clients that are farmers, and they may be passing livestock, of course, land, highly appreciated securities, real estate. But my favorite was the pigs and cows got donated one time.
So old Yeller.
Yeah. So with a donor advised fund, it really is a advantageous and I'll say a very approachable way to, in essence, sort of create your own foundation. And a company like Thrivent, for instance, many financial services companies do this extremely well as well. But a company like Thrivent would accept your donation into your own fund. It takes a couple minutes to set it up. I think the most difficult part about setting up a donor advised fund is just choosing the name. Is it the Hautly Family Fund? Those kind of things are very simple to set up. And then the professional that you're working with can help walk you through how to do all the other stuff. You don't have to worry about it. Where it can become impactful is there are things like charitable bundling strategies, where we're saying, hey, if we want to be advantageous from a tax perspective, we can maybe donate 2 years of charitable contributions, sandwich it in 1 year, and maybe that gets us above the standard deduction.
Yeah.
And the following year, we donate nothing to our donor advised fund, but our church, our charity, the organization that we're serving does still get to get that in that second year, for instance, because it's wrapped up inside that donor advised fund. There's not a time frame necessarily that you have to get the donations out of the donor advised fund and into the hands of your church or charity. And Nate, you just mentioned it a minute ago. It's a great case in point. If you're going, oh gosh, we're getting out the party hats, we're, setting up the pots and pans to bang on December 31st. Did we do the charitable donation? You may not know where some of those dollars are going just yet, and you don't have to know. It's about the dollar amount that you gave from your heart into, for instance, your donor advised fund.
Now, say the money sits for a year. Does it just sit at that level? Does it accrue any interest? How does that work?
Yeah, you get to choose. And so there are very conservative options inside most donor advised funds that may be based on an interest rate, a competitive interest rate in whatever the Fed market would be at the time. And then there's also investment options. If you're donating, 2, 3, 5, 10 years in advance, you don't necessarily want to pull that out of perhaps market participation or portfolio participation. And so there's plenty of investment options as well that still allow for you to participate in growth after it's already been donated.
What about real estate?
Real estate also donatable. Really, you can, and I go back to the pigs and the cows, you can really donate almost anything. Of course, I have to say almost. You can really donate almost anything, and a lot of times that financial institution who's running the donor advised fund is going to be able to help you see the value of it. And I say that to say, let's say you have a piece of art. I had a client who they had an appreciation for nice wines, and they said, you know what, I don't need all this anymore. If they were to turn around and sell a piece of art or sell, appreciated, bottles of wine, for instance, there is a collectibles tax on that if you're reporting everything above the table. And those kind of things can be taken care of by the donor advised fund company. They assess it. You actually donate in the same way that you donate a share of stock. You would actually donate physical assets. They take care of selling it for you. And then that ultimately gets to be your charitable contribution.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. And so, one scenario, of course, these are all scenarios you'll talk with your financial advisor and your accountant about details. However, one scenario is you have appreciated rental property and you're like, oh my goodness, my capital gains are going to kill me because I've got, I've run through all my bases and I don't want to do a 1031 exchange. I'm tired of exchanging. I just want I just want to do something else. Well, and I'm going to give anyway. I'm going to give cash. Well, don't give the cash as an option, right? Now we're talking about, hey, donate the property. You saved, and I'm just using hypothetical numbers, save 30% on depreciation recapture and your state tax, and could be more, it could be less. And then you've got the charitable contribution, which is a deduction. Maybe, who knows, if your tax bracket's 40% between federal and state, there's 40 cents on the dollar. Plus, guess what? You were going to give anyway cash. Now you get to keep cash. And this is just a hypothetical situation, but there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And I think, donor advised funds in a situation like that is just scratching the surface. There are other ways, and I don't want to get too complex for a 30,000 foot conversation, but there are ways. Even that little example might have been, way over the top. Sure, but there are ways that you can have a partial charitable deduction and future income that also just says that, hey, when I pass, anything remaining would go to a charity. So there are a lot of options out there as well, where if you do, let's say, need some of those assets or some of the funds from that, but you also would like to be charitable, maybe it's at your passing, there are ways that you can combine those two things and, leave a gift at your passing, also have a charitable deduction on the front end, and in the interim, perhaps have some income for you or for your family.
Fantastic, man. And there's so many others. We'll have to have another episode. We've got charitable remainder trusts and all kinds of different ways that we can really have a strategy, like you said, that are pretty cool in this space of living generously. I love that phrase. So if you're listening, you're like, oh my goodness, they're just getting started. Well, we've been at it for almost an hour. So this is the beauty of this. Of course, we'll make sure you can find Adam and his team on in our show notes in case you've got further questions, even in this space or others. And we'll definitely have you back on the show, because what a great conversation. It doesn't have to be this sort of sterile, like, we're going to talk about financial, money and all this other. I'm going to just fast forward to the next episode. It's, you talked about church. A lot of times church is, and people have said, all they do is talk about money. All they do is talk about, you got to give more money to the church, more money to the church, more money to the church, right?
One thing that I love, just rewinding a few years, and when everybody signed up for their, Robinhood or E-Trade account and things like that, like back in COVID, for instance. And I think a lot of people, saw this opportunity. I joked that we had a lot of stockbrokers made, over the course of a month or two, when it was, very easy to pick some very successful equities or stocks. And I see a lot with clients who, have, I always jokingly call it the fun money account. And they've got the fun money account sitting off to the side. Maybe it has a few thousand in it and there's some gains in there. There's never really a purpose for it. It was just kind of fun to do at the time and stuff. Those fund money accounts, for instance, with some of those gains can be an awesome opportunity to be tax strategic with charitable giving. And in the same way you talked about with the rental property, the cash stays in your pocket. We get to take the long-term capital gains off the table, and still be, charitable, all while you don't really have to do anything. For most financial services companies, it's calling another company and finding out what form do they require to be able to donate some of those securities.
Yeah, man.
It's a really simple process. Even though it sounds complex, it is a really simple and fun process too, because now something that, in the case of the fund money account, I don't mean to say it's purposeless. It served its purpose at the time and stuff like that, but it just kind of sits off to the side. Now there's a really meaningful purpose that you get to bless others with.
Come on. Love it. Hey, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for having that cheese family too. I've really enjoyed Hautly cheese over the years. Another plug for the family.
The one thing that I do miss from when I was there is, instead of having a vegetable drawer, we had a cheese drawer in our refrigerator, and now it's back to vegetables.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think I would propose it if you ever wanted a complimentary product, it could be, Hautly, what do they call them? Suppositories. I don't know what they call right next to the cheese aisle. Maybe not. We don't want that. Anyway, thanks again, brother. It's good having you.
Thank you. What a great way to end. Suppositories.